I think Silicon Slopes came from kind of this passion that I had for the state of Utah and its growth and being able to inspire a next generation of entrepreneurs and leaders to make the state even better than we found it, right? And so I was running a software development firm in about 2011, 2012. We were working with early stage startups. We were helping them build their initial product or their MVP and helping them get it to a point where they could transition to an in-house team. While we were doing that, we were working with some of the major tech companies that came out of Utah that went public, that exited for, billions of dollars. Like the first people they talked to about their idea was us. It was fascinating. It was very exciting. And we were, we'd help them build this thing and think through. Some of them we even named at the software development firm. And we're sold for billions of dollars afterwards. And some of them are public companies right now. As we were doing that, we realized no one knew about them. Strangely enough, like nobody was writing about these companies. This is like in the days of like TechCrunch. Remember when TechCrunch meant something, maybe it still does. I don't want to insult TechCrunch, but it was a really big deal to be written up in TechCrunch or something of that nature. And nobody was doing that for Utah. None of the local newspapers, anything like that, was kind of telling the story of these founders and entrepreneurs and what they were building and the community that was kind of coming together around it. And so at the dev shop, we decided we would do it. And I bought the domain beehivestartups.com. I put no thought into it whatsoever. For those who don't know, Utah is the beehive state. And so I was like, all right, let's beehivestartups.com. And I just started writing, going around, interviewing these entrepreneurs, writing their stories, publishing them. Nobody would read it. We had Google Analytics on the website. I told them to take it off because it was depressing. I mean, we're talking about a very niche audience, right? We're talking about like people who are interested in Utah tech startups. So the audience wasn't very big. And so we did this for about a year and a half, I just went around and interviewed these folks, wrote stories. I randomly majored in journalism in college, pointless thing to do, but it became a not so pointless, I guess, in this endeavor. And so would write these stories. And then we popped our head up about a year and a half in, and we realized we'd built a community, because although no one was reading these stories in the broader world, right, the people who were reading them were the people we were writing about. These companies and these founders loved it, and they would share it around and with people they wanted to invest, or whatever it was. They really liked it because it wasn't a press release, right? It was kind of like their authentic story. And we realized at that point that we had a community, and our community was these people that we wrote about, these CEOs and these founders who were building something really interesting in the state of Utah. And it got to the point where these folks, these leaders, were pushing us to do events. Now, I'd never done an event in my life. I didn't even know what it meant to do an event, right? But they're like, hey, why don't you do events? Some of us will come speak at them every once in a while. And so I'm like, all right, we'll do an event. Started doing some events. They went okay. I want to say they're great. But we started doing some events where we basically just do fireside chats, and we do them at local colleges and things like that. And then one day I got a sponsorship check to Beehive Startups. I think it was like $10,000 sponsorship check. And it was from a local venture fund. And I called them and I said, hey, thank you for this. Beehive Startups doesn't have a bank account. There's no way to there's no way to deposit this, right? Because the Beehive Startups wasn't the name of the dev shop. It was just the name of this blog that we were writing. And I said, I'm going to send it back to you. And he said, no, you're going to create a bank account. And you're going to deposit it. And then and I was like, oh, all right, cool. So that's how Beehive Startups came to be. And it really started to gain on with the community through these events, through these stories. An early win, an interesting thing that happened to us was there was this local news story where a bunch of bee rustlers, yeah, you heard that right, bee rustlers, had stolen bees from a local beekeeper, this 15-year-old beekeeper. His name is Bryce Bunderson. I still remember him very well. And as I was scrolling Twitter one day, again, this is early days of even Twitter, I just started laughing. Like, this kid was running a literal beehive startup our name, which we'd put no thought into, was Beehive Startups. It felt appropriate for us to help this Beehive startup kid kind of get his money back. I think they sold like $15,000 worth of bees, and they stole like the queen bees and honey. Anyway, there's a whole thing. I got like really into like bee rustling and things like that just because the name itself was cool. And so we were like, well, let's help this kid. And so we made a big deal out of the fact that, you know, we were helping this beehive startup, and we made a video because back in those days with GoFundMe, they all had videos. I don't think that's true anymore, but it was like it was pretty video heavy, where we had kind of all the major tech players in Utah appearing in the video, you know, trying to raise this $15,000 for this kid. And it was fun. And we're driving up and down I-15, which is kind of the main highway in Utah, just laughing and having a good time about, you know, the fact that he's running a BH Startups. Our name is BH Startup, and just how fun it was. And for whatever reason, I'm not entirely sure why, we saved our filming with Bryce Bunderson for last, him and his family. And as soon as we met them, it wasn't funny anymore. Like, we actually needed to do this because it was a big deal to the Bunderson family that they'd lost this amount of money and this equipment and, you know, all of these beekeeping items. That was a big deal. Like, it put food on their plates. Like, it was no joke. And I still remember walking back to the car with the film crew that we brought along and saying, well, now we have to actually do this. Like, this is like this just became very real. Like, we have to go make the difference for this Bunderson family. And we did. Like, the community stepped up and raised well over they needed. And, you know, we even had a local bee company give them all everything they lost, even some queen bees. Like, it's like a crazy thing. It's like, you know, like, but it showed me, what it taught me more than anything in those early days is just the power of community to give and be about something other than themselves. There's nothing about beekeeping that has anything to do with tech. And yet a bunch of tech entrepreneurs and tech CEOs and venture capitalists in the Utah community stepped up and gave back to this kid and this family who had been devastated by this loss. And it really was a good lesson for me, particularly for it to happen early on, in just what you can do as a community and to really kind of think outside of the box in ways you can serve and the impact you can have. So anyways, that's a long answer to your question, but that started it. And then we created a nonprofit for Silicon Slopes, which Josh James had coined very early on. He did Omniture. He sold Omniture to Adobe for $1.8 billion in 2009, which was incredible, showing that in Utah, you could get a Silicon Valley exit without living in Silicon Valley. That was a huge deal. Mm-hmm. We should build a statue to him. But he had coined the phrase Silicon Slopes, and he'd had it inside of his new company, Domo, which is a public company now. And at some point, he was doing some things with like calendars and various events, and we kind of got the top tech leaders in the community together, created a 501c3 nonprofit, merged Beehive Startups because I'd put no thought into the name. He'd put a lot of thought into Silicon Slopes, right? That's a pretty thoughtful name. So we went with that, and here we are today, 10 years later.
Fantastic. What a story. Look at that. And not just 10 years later, Clint, hundreds of thousands of people affected, people flying in every year to speak. We're talking every key, marquee, celebrity, tech brand out there being represented on there. I don't think there's anybody you haven't had yet come out to speak and ultimately inspire everyone around. And of course, you've rubbed the shoulders with a lot of them. I want to keep asking you one more thing. So what's the future then of Silicon Slopes? Where is it heading? Just on Silicon Slopes, yeah.
Yeah, a lot has changed. Like when we first started this organization, events were kind of non-existent, to be honest with you. Like not a lot of people were organizing tech folks together, developers, whatever it was, the tech community in Utah. Now events are kind of ubiquitous. You guys kind of see this everywhere. Like events are not like a differentiator at all. And that was kind of what Silicon Slopes did for up until COVID, was we held a lot of events. We'd bring the community together, we'd convene. We obviously do Summit. those types of things. And COVID really changed things, obviously, for everyone in the world, but particularly for an organization that was averaging about an event a day. Now, these are smaller events, but about an event a day to no events at all for 2.5 years. And figuring out how do we, organize and keep this community together if we're not doing it in person. And now coming out of COVID, we're still kind of in this interesting spot where I don't think events matter as much as they used to, right? It's not a differentiator even for attendees to go to an event, right? It's just not as big of a deal. And I'll give you an example of that. In 2020, the January of 2020, and if you'll remember, COVID hit March 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So we got this in right before COVID hit. We had 30,000 people at the Salt Palace in downtown Salt Lake City. We had Mark Zuckerberg coming on stage. Nobody had heard him speak too much. Like, he wasn't as ubiquitous, again, as he is today. Like, you can go to a podcast and listen to him for 3 hours, talk about like what he's doing. And that happens about every month or two, right? Which is fascinating. At that point in 2020, he'd only given a Georgetown University keynote speech in 5 years. Nobody had heard him really say anything. And he was in the midst of a lot of controversy around Russia and whether Russia helped with the election. I mean, there was like all these documents, you remember, like he's always in controversy, right? He's in some now. And so it was a big deal to have Mark Zuckerberg, on stage, and he live streamed it from his Facebook page. And it was just really, this fun thing, and millions of people saw it. It really put Utah on the map and that type of thing. And then COVID hits, and coming out of COVID, we had as big of a name, Tim Cook, come and speak, and it didn't hit the same way. Is that, and that has nothing to do with Tim. It's just kind of effect. Like, I don't think Mark, it would hit the same way anymore. Like, these events with these big tech luminaries, it's an interesting world we're living in. So where do we go from here? I think it's more curated connections. I think obviously it's really great for Utah and for those folks to come here and see what's happening and have them speak. But I think it'll be a little bit more curated in the sense of the type of connections and the type of knowledge you're wanting to get as an entrepreneur or somebody building a company. You're no longer will you just kind of go to an event for 2 days where people are up there on panels, right? I think it's a different environment, and that's what Silicon Slopes is working through right now, is how to make that more curated connections and make sure that everybody who walks into an event has the ROI, right? Again, you're talking to somebody who's not really an event planner. and so blowing it all up is great for me. Like, I don't have any sacred cows as it comes to it. So that's kind of where we're at now with Silicon Slopes, is figuring out how we surround Utah entrepreneurs with everything they need in order to be successful.
Wonderful.
I can attest to that. Clint, I'm from SoCal, but I came to Silicon Slopes. I think number of connections I had, meetings, just run-ins, whatever, like 10-1 compared to the chats, the fireside chats or speeches that I listened to. It's like the most of it happened for me right outside of the big screen arena area. Even when I went to the Startup Alley, it was a lot of connections around. So kudos to you guys doing those things. But there's something about Utah in general. Like, people are so helpful. I don't know where that's coming from, and it's trying to be helpful without anything in return.
Yeah, well, I don't want to like overstate how great Utah is, but I obviously love it. We have here an ethos in the state of community that's kind of embedded, just given like the founding of the state was, a group of religious folks who came out of here to escape persecution. Over 50% of the population, as I understand it, is still members of that faith. And so it comes a little bit from that. Like, there is this pioneer spirit because it was literally founded by pioneers, and this belief in community, because like you can only rely on the people around you, right? And so serve and give, and that kind of same types of stuff happens to you. As far as the tech community, though, Utah has a pretty rich tech history that I don't know that a lot of people know about. We were the fourth node of the internet and the first one outside of California. when that happened. So that was crazy. And in the late 90s, probably 2 of the top 10 tech companies were in Utah, Novell and WordPerfect. And I mean, the CEO of Novell left to be the CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, right? Like, Utah has this really interesting tech history that has allowed it to have folks who can reach back and mentor the next generation because they've done it before, right? And that is the beauty of Silicon Valley. What makes Silicon Valley the mecca of startups and entrepreneurship, in my opinion, is the community that exists there and the amount of people who have been successful, who are willing to kind of give back and kind of help the next generation. And Utah has something very similar to Silicon Valley in that they have a lot of people who've had a lot of wins who want to kind of give back and help the next generation get as many wins.
That's why we're here, right? This is Fearless Founder is exactly for that. So can you maybe touch base on that a little bit, like maybe double click on that? You've probably seen, you probably have heard stories about how that actually happened, like mentoring the next generation, or maybe you have some thoughts about what founders should pay attention to these days, but landmines they can avoid. Let's start. There's millions of them, but I'm sure we'll dig into some of them.
Yeah, what I love about what you're doing is it is kind of all about the founder, right? And that's a big deal in a startup community. In fact, I firmly believe entrepreneurs and founders should lead startup communities. It shouldn't be VCs. And that is another unique thing about Utah, is that it is the entrepreneurs who are leading it. The founders of Silicon Slopes were all entrepreneurs. They were all founders, right, of companies. And the fact that they would get in a room and put their egos and logos at the door and talk about how to grow the community and not grow their companies, or, like that type of, is nuts. That's super rare, right? And so what you want is to have founders who have that kind of servant mentality, who want to give for the sake of giving, right? Like, if you've made it and in our case, like, one of our founders owns the Utah Jazz and the Utah Hockey Club, like, he's made it, right? The fact that he's still like giving back and supporting the next generation of entrepreneurs is really quite remarkable. And so I think you need that in a community, particularly in a startup community. It should be led by entrepreneurs. And for whatever reason, that's not the case. I'm sure that you've seen, like, around the country and around the world, it's mostly run by VCs. And what they want, and VCs are great, right? They're an important, very important aspect of a startup community. But they want a very specific company, which kind of excludes about 99% of all other companies or founders or entrepreneurs, right? And so, yeah, I would say that has been really useful for the state of Utah, is to have founders at the center of the community, kind of helping and leading and guiding everybody else.
I agree, and the fundamental thing that we've learned over time, not just from interviewing but also from running businesses ourselves, is that ultimately it's a lonely place, and the mind gets caught up in all of the what about if this happened, or what's going to happen if I don't talk to the board properly, or what if I can't raise enough? How do I address this difficult employee? And all these things come up, and you've faced it personally, and you've seen it in all of the interactions. So, if I may, I'd love to find out from you, from having talked to Zuckerberg to whomever, are there a couple of 2-3 points that you see regularly coming up that founders should be aware of, prepare for, plan on experiencing? What sage advice can you provide from having hung around, as well as being an operator yourself in the past?
Well, I will say, to touch on your first point, entrepreneurship is very lonely. Nobody cares what you're doing, right? That's a pretty interesting place to be in as an entrepreneur. Like, nobody cares what you're doing. Like, your family doesn't even care. They're just like, are you making money? Like, are you okay? Like, but they're not going to ask about it or get in debt. They don't care, right? And that is a very interesting, kind of crazy place to be in. And so the only way to kind of find a community in that and to not be so lonely is to be around other founders and entrepreneurs who are experiencing something similar to you, who know what you're going through and care because it's happening to them, right? So I think you're dead on that point. in terms of things I've seen in other leaders that I would expect, like I would expect it to be bumpy, right? Like it never goes the way you plan. Everything always takes longer, costs more, is harder than you think it is in the whiteboard meeting, right? Whiteboard meetings are awesome because everything's possible on there, and all you have to do is draw it with a marker, and there it is, right? And then when you actually go into the real world and try to create it, it's a lot different. And I would expect just go in with the mindset of like, yeah, this is the journey is the point. The outcome is not the point, right? The journey is the point. Like the success and money and things that come with it are kind of irrelevant, actually. Like what you'll remember is the journey and being in those rooms and trying to figure things out and solving problems that seem insolvable. Like, how are we going to get around this speed bump? This is impossible. And then you get around it, and then everybody who was in that room and helped you get over it is now your friend for life. Like they're just like, you went through something together, right? It's pretty beautiful. And so I would embrace the journey. If I were an entrepreneur right now, particularly one at an early stage, I would love the fact and really embrace the fact that nobody cares about what you're doing. Like turn that on its head. Like that's actually a good thing. Now you have an opportunity to throw a lot of things up against the wall, see what sticks. And it doesn't matter if one of them doesn't stick because nobody cares what you're doing, right? That's not as possible with big, like it's not as possible even with Silicon Slopes. Like Silicon Slopes going to just announce something tomorrow and then a week later say it didn't work, we're out, or without any consequences, right? But at an early stage, you're able to do that. And there's a lot of learning and a lot of value that comes into that, I think.
I think you're absolutely right. I have to tell you this quick story. A long time ago, I ran into a particular neighbor who had his and her two-door convertible Rolls Royces parked. And I said, who are these people? And I went and found this Mr. and Mrs. Chen. And I just said, Mr. Chen, hi, I'm fairly ambitious, but I have no experience with businesses. May I interview you? Because I'd like to start a business one day. And he said, sure, come to my office on whatever. So I show up on in his office, and on one faraway corner was his partner and his wife, who was over all the accounting, and he was over everything else. And we sat down, I peppered him with questions. And I said, so how did you get started? He said, well, we were so poor, we were dumpster diving for couches for college, my wife and I. And then we figured out how to create a formula, because I was a chemist undergrad. And we figured out how to create makeup and things for the skin. And we ended up selling this part-time, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger. So I kept peppering, and then he said, stop. He said, stop. And he said, you're asking me questions on how to start a business and what to avoid and what to get. He said, I'm not going to answer any more of your questions. Go start one.
Yep, that's right.
He says, go start one. I've never forgotten that lesson. And I went, okay, all right, I'll do it, And that's how the journey goes. It's lonely. No one supports you, but you've got to do it. You've got to do it. And you have to enjoy the journey, like you said, for there are many milestones you're always looking for. And then you realize, oh my goodness, I crossed another chasm. I can breathe payroll one more time.
Yeah, that's right. Like, I don't think there's any substitute to start. Like if you haven't started one, like how would you know, right? Like, and that's why like repeat founders are so great, right? They understand like, I don't know, this might work, this might not. Like what we even do 5 years from now might not work, but let's embrace the journey and embrace the problem we're trying to solve and figure out the best way to do it. Yeah, I think you got to start. That's probably the best piece of advice to give anyone is, you want to know how to do it? Go do it. Right.
Yeah, it's true. One of the things I've noticed you doing though is you were very quick to pivot. Maybe you don't think so because you have to go through all the lumps and bruises. But I've loved how you've been able to take from Beehive Startup, Silicon Slopes, go around capturing stories to small events to big events. And now, since COVID, people aren't responding, so let's create more intimacy and connections at a different level. That's another component of a lesson I know plenty about. You got to move with what's happening and not stay stagnant and say my original thesis is still it. We're not going to move. We're going to stay there. Then you die, right?
Yeah, you've got to constantly be changing your mind, right? Like we should have like strong beliefs loosely held. I think that's what Mark Andreessen said one time. I agree with that. Like have a strong belief in like, hey, it's important to have a community of entrepreneurs and founders who get together and support each other. How? Like, how we get there, that part kind of doesn't matter, right? As long as you're focused on that existing and the best way for that to exist.
I think we need to help our first-time founders do that, because that's a skill. I think when you're starting, there's a lot of fear-based decisions. Your emotions run you. When your second time gets a little lower, the third time lower, but on the first one, everything is like extra boosted. And you got to have the conviction about your idea, your product, your service, right? But leaving the ego at the door and just listening to a customer, maybe the different idea or your co-founder's ideas is really hard, isn't it? Like to be able to do those pivots.
Oh yeah, and you've got to be willing to be wrong. You like if you're pivoting, you likely failed in some aspect, and like, great, right? Like I don't think the whole point of business is to fail, right? Like I think we sometimes celebrate failure too much, but as long as you're alive, meaning the company's alive and you're still going, be willing to take risks. Don't put all the chips in the middle of the table, but put a lot of them in there and kind of get a sense and trust your gut, trust your conviction. I think too often people are looking at kind of the main big celebrity entrepreneurs and CEOs and think they have something uniquely special or qualifying about them that makes it so only they can do that and I can't. And the thing that they have that a lot of people don't is one, short memories, willing to, like not taking the losses too hard, right? Like, yeah, we tried it, it didn't work, right? But we're still going ahead. We still believe in the mission. Let's keep going. And just this unwavering determination to succeed and not to fail, right? Probably even more not to fail than to succeed, right? We are going to keep this company alive no matter what.